Okay, so let's get started while our colleagues are joining. Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Mary, and I lead the UN Behavioral Science Group. I'm one of the individuals here working in Innovation Network on behavioral science. The session today we have is Introduction to Behavioral Science. We'll be discussing policy and programming, as well as reducing administrative burden. So a little bit about the week overall to get us situated in terms of where the session fits. So UN Behavioral Science Week brings together 18 UN entities in over 20 sessions over the course of the week. So there's lots there to explore, ranging from health, climate, peace and security, gender, lots of topics. They said 18 entities participating. So if you haven't checked out the agenda already, I would encourage you to do so. So that's the week itself. A little bit about the UN Behavioral Science Group. So the UN Behavioral Science Group brings together over 1,000 colleagues across the UN system from over 60 entities in 110 countries. There's quite a lot of colleagues in the UN interested in behavioral science. And this group consists of people who are starting on their journey, kind of at the beginning stages of thinking about how to conceptualize behavioral science and put in their projects, through to those who are actual behavioral scientists themselves. We have a range of people in the UN system. That said, most people in the group really that start those beginning stages of their behavioral science work. So that's basically the group overall. A little bit about sort of where UN behavioral science sits across the UN. So the Secretary General has recognized the importance of behavioral science in a variety of ways. He's called it a critical tool for the UN to progress on its mandate, contributing to a variety of areas, and also strongly encourages colleagues to invest in behavioral science and to work in a collaborative and connected way. So there's lots there. There's a document called the UN Secretary General's Guidance Note, which I'll speak to a little bit at the end of the session today. If you want more detail on that, I encourage you to check it out. So in terms of how we think about behavioral science in the UN, how we've conceptualized it in that concept note with the Secretary General is looking at two ways. So first, applying behavioral science to policy and programming. So this could be, we'll hear from our speaker today about the ways we apply behavioral science, but some things that can be achieved by it is increased effectiveness in programs, also more evidence-based thinking and work behind the work that we do in the UN as well. So that's one area. The second area is the reduction of administrative burdens and how the importance of them in the UN system. When we say administrative burdens, when we think about it from a behavioral science perspective, we understand that paperwork can be costly, administrative processes can create frictions, it can cause time, emotional challenges, cost challenges. These are not trivial things and they often get overlooked. So we can think about this in the programmatic sense as well as in the internal operations sense of the UN. So thinking about how we can apply behavioral science to address administrative burdens is also an area that we're exploring. And I'd like to introduce my colleague, Lucy Martin, who's joined us today. She's a researcher in the area of administrative burden and behavioral science, and she's been working with us on these issues. So she'll join us for the Q&A after the session and to answer any specific questions in this area. But just wanted to say that's sort of how we're thinking about it overall, and our speaker will go through more about how behavioral science has been applied to address these areas in the UN overall. So I also wanted to note that yesterday we launched the UN Practitioner's Guide to Getting Started with Behavioral Science. This is a document that was created across the UN system with input in terms of how to apply behavioral science and various steps along the way. So it's based on the work of governments, academia, and international organizations who have carried out work over the last decade since this field really started. And we worked to tailor it to the UN context as best we could. So we're intending it to be a guide for those such as yourselves joining us today, who I think are at the early stages of your journey to take with you and to move forward. And it also provides a lot of resources in there at the back, depending on what you're looking for, some of them from the World Bank, which is where our speaker is joining us from today. So before we get into today's session, I just want to talk a little bit about how it's going to be run. So we will be hearing from our speaker for about 20-25 minutes, 30 minutes maybe. And then we are hoping to have a Q&A discussion afterwards. So you can use the chat for discussion throughout the session, but if you want to ask a question to our speaker or to myself or to my colleague Lucy, you put it in the Q&A box and we can discuss it there, and you can upvote the questions of your colleagues as well. So if you don't have one yourself, check out the box and see if there are questions you would like to see an answer to. So with that, I'd like to introduce our speaker for today. We're very fortunate to have with us Renos Vakis, who's the lead economist in the World Bank's Mind, Behavior, and Development Unit. It's basically the World Bank's behavioral science team. For those of you who don't know about it, I would encourage you to check out their website. I'll put it in the chat right before when Renos starts speaking. There are a lot of resources on there in terms of case studies and and ways of working in behavioral science in ways that really resonate in the UN system. So, so with that, I will turn it over to Renos for his presentation.
Thank you, Mary, and hello, everyone, wherever you are. So this session is basically aimed to be a teaser, and in a short 20-30 minutes, give you a glimpse of what type of problems and how behavior science can be used. So I'll do three things. I'll give you very quickly the concepts and how we think about behavior science, and then show you some examples of our work over the last few years. As Mary said, we've been around for about 5 years now, and really happy to share, how we have been thinking and how we have operationalized behavior science in policy. So before we do that, let me ask all of you to think of a number, 1 or 2. Just pick one of the two. So if your number is 1, please I'm going to give you 5 seconds to solve the next slide's problem. So come up with an answer in 5 seconds. If you're number 2, close your eyes, and when I ask you, open your eyes and solve the problem you will see on the screen. So here goes for group number 1, 5 seconds, find the answer to this problem. Okay, now group number 2, find the answer to this problem. If you want, please share your answers on the chat. Just write, your group number and an answer. I'll give you about 10 seconds to do that, to see how many you want to share there. Math isn't that good. It's not a good answer. Give your estimate. Okay, so if you do this in an experimental, maybe you're too shy, but sometimes we do need to make fast answers. But this experiment shows 2 things. One, if you do this in a more, in an experimental setting, people who see the top variant, 1 times 2, 1 times 3, all the way up to 8, the mode of that, their answer would be around 500. If you reverse the order, so it's exactly the same problem, but we just put the larger numbers first, most people, the mode would be around 2000. Lucy's, being the nerd of the group, more or less got it about right. So the correct answer is around 40,000. So what's the point of this? One, this is a principle of anchoring. So when we anchor ourselves to, things and in numbers in this case, our brain has a hard time, in a way, uses that to leverage that information, even if it's not useful to solve a problem and to find, to come up with solutions. And many times during our day, we make a lot of quick decisions by using, many heuristics, including anchoring. The second, which is interesting, is that most people, still screw up the answer, way by factor almost 20. So yes, guessing not always good, and yet, we have to do it all day. So this was just to show you an example of heuristics. The second is it's an illustration around how we make decisions socially. So I'm not going to ask you to do anything, but here. Imagine you're in your office and you all agree to share the cost of milk for the coffee machine, and so every week there is a little bucket you can put your contribution, and on the refrigerator every week. So if you see the numbers from 1 to 10. Somebody changes a photo, and the photo is what you see for each given week. So the first week you see this kind of scary eyes. Second week, flowers. Third week, woman's eyes. 4-week, flowers, and so on. And what this experiment did is to try to see how much do people on average contribute from milk. So the first week, they contribute around, 70 cents, per pound. The second week, this goes down to 20 cents. The third week goes up to 35 cents. Flowers come again, goes down to 1 cent. Hopefully you can see a pattern. Ice, it goes up again. Flowers goes down. Ice up, down, up, and down. So the question, what's going on here? Is it just, do people really hate flowers? And what it turns out, I mean, what this experiment has been trying to show is that we take a lot of cues socially, even if it's a picture, even if it's a, kind of an illustration of the notion of, kind of people in this case, kind of connecting, watching us, can actually, in a way, unconsciously create an incentive for us to, in this case, contribute more. And again, the point here is to show that we make a lot of our decisions in a social setting. So what others are doing around us, what we think they're doing, really affects how we make decisions. And the last example to illustrate some of these ideas of behavior science is this one. So you see this, polygon, and you see it has two parts: the bottom and the bottom and the top. And what I, answer in your head, do you think the two shapes, the bottom and the top, are, slightly different colors or different shades of, gray or whatever you see? And I think most of you will agree that the top one is darker. So now I'm gonna do one simpler change. I'm gonna basically cover the middle part. So let's do it. And now to compare the two colors of the two shapes. And I didn't do any tricks. There's no, there's no fancy art thing. And I'm gonna take it away so you see it. So as I take it away, you can see how, basically, for most of you, you should have seen that when we cover the middle point, you just see one color, the two parts. And what's happening here, it's a nice illustration to talk about, mental models. It's the idea that, what your brain perceives, it's a function of, your history and your reality. And in this case, your eyes, send signals, to your brain that because you see shade, you potentially perceive an angle, you see a sky. We make assumptions automatically as to where the light is coming in. And because of that, we have been, in a way, conditioned to know that when light comes this particular way, one side needs to be darker than the other because the sun won't hit it, etc. And we perceive this as two different shades. But in reality, as I showed you, these are the same color. And these three examples basically is just to show you that what behavioral sciences tries to do is to really bring these elements into the basic idea that we actually make decisions not just by cost-benefit analysis and more economistic and thinking, but actually by finding and relying a lot on these mental shortcuts and this kind of automatic thinking, by thinking socially and really relying on everybody around us, their expectations of us, our assumptions about their behaviors and the norms that those permeate, and also by kind of our interpretation of the world given our prior history and our experiences. These three things together is what I would call kind of elements of behavior science. And my team, just like all of you who are interested, hopefully we've been trying to understand how to apply this in public policy. And basically we do three things. We've been creating a proof of concept over the last 2 years that we have now grown to be kind of more integrated into our general teams across the bank, across all areas. In the process, we aim to generate capacity and bring that capacity both to World Bank operations, governments directly, and to our partners at scale. And we do that by, kind of a catchy idea of, we become really a part of the team. We tag along specific teams in operation, and we try to solve one or more of their problems in the specific context and country and sector, and we do that by we offer a number of instruments which I'll go very quickly, but this cover anything from kind of diagnostics, which is really understanding a problem from a behavioral angle, to collecting data that is more behavior inclined, to providing evidence, which I think it's probably one of the key elements of how behavior science has expanded in the last few years, by showing results and evidence in a rigorous way. But more and more, we are also working on building internal capacity to all sorts of counterparts to be able for them to expand the use of behavior science. We basically, by now, we have worked on all of the core issues of, of the World Bank, or you can think in terms of policy. So I think what basically I would like to do now is to just take you over a few examples of how we do it and a few examples of our work. So the first thing I want to quickly show is, okay, so what does it mean? How do you then think about behavior science? And one really, core tool that we always try to do is this concept of a behavior map. If you can think of any problem, and what we try to do is we try to always find, a user, an agent, a person who is trying to, do or not do a given behavior, and then we try to really map their journey into what goes into the decision. And just to give you a very simple example, imagine you're in this situation. I know this is not really most of you your expertise, but imagine the problem you want to solve is you're in a setting where water is not safe, and you're asked to find ways to help people use chlorine. And so kind of an economist would say, okay, so get chlorine, use chlorine, and then that's the end. And then you can think a little bit, supply, demand, the price of chlorine, etc. What we try to do is to break this use chlorine all the way to kind of into decisions and actions, and try to break down this journey by which the final outcome is to really add chlorine. And when we do that, one example could look something like that. So people, first they're going to ask, well, should I use chlorine? Do they understand, what is chlorine? If there's alternatives, is there an intention to use chlorine? What do other people around me doing? And then you get to, more information stuff, where to buy it. Then there's going to be some action related to that. I need to go there. Do I have the money? How I'm going to go there? You go there, you may have different choices. How do I know how to contribute? And so on. And I won't go through the whole cycle, but just to see, by breaking this down into the mini steps, you bring the chlorine, you buy chlorine, you're at home, you need to store things, you need to remember when to do it, when to, to be able to understand that your water is clean, etc. And what we try to do once we create this map is to then, for each of these steps, we really try to map the potential constraints and bottlenecks that people may have that are not enabling them to actually, be able to kind of have that specific action or decision to come up with to do the action, and therefore allowing them to continue down kind of this journey map. So a lot of our behavior diagnostics is to find quantitatively and assess which of these are most relevant, prioritize among them, and potentially find solutions for very specific, parts of this journey. And once we do that, we can make beautiful behavior maps for different topics, and discuss and actually take action and work with kind of the counterparts and the teams to potentially design solutions and ideas. So this is a little bit of kind of the how, kind of a one way of how we get to this, but maybe so to flesh it even further, let me give you some examples of our work over the last few years. So we've done a lot of work in domestic revenue mobilization, so taxes, tax revenues, a lot of issues about people paying taxes, people so behaviorally, what are the problems? People not paying taxes or people paying taxes late, both of which have implications for planning, for managing, budgets at the central level, etc., or even at the subnational level. And so on the left, you kind of see a little bit of a version of a behavior map. Again, kind of working through this mapping and journey of how do people are going to make this decision about mapping. And it's not just enough about to know that I need to declare taxes, but I need to know the information of how to do it. But then there's other things like consequences about the norms. What do others do, or what happens with the money? There's trust issues. You can imagine all the reasons one can kind of be skeptical or be aware, or be a bit more resistant to thinking about, kind of about paying taxes or not. You can be an individual, you can be a firm. So over the last few years, we've used that to, for different settings to do experiments. And in this case on the right, I'm showing you a set of experiments we've done in Indonesia with the government to help small and medium enterprises pay timely the monthly taxes. And again, there, what we found, it was less about resistance to actually pay taxes, but it was a lot was around kind of information, both on the people needed a bit of a reminder of sorts, but also a bit more information as to how this money is used and why it's useful to to pay taxes as a citizen, as a firm. And from the experiments, what you can see, kind of the three middle bars, in a way, are variations of calendars that were sent directly to these firms to put somewhere on the on their business, and the calendar itself was designed to give information on the calendar on due tax due dates, and also give some additional information about what the money was being used and how to pay taxes, etc. And you can see that just by kind of a simple intervention like that, the government, the tax authorities were able to increase revenues in the range of 15–20%. So in terms of the second bucket of work we've done is around jobs. So jobs, you can think of like 2–3 buckets of work that we found consistently relevant across the world. One is about job search, especially around youth. How do you motivate? How do you help people through their first journey of doing transition from school to work transitions? There was a second bucket quite relevant in many regions around gender norms, labor force participation. How should women navigate especially more complex norms around the role of women in the labor force, public versus private, and what are the different bottlenecks in different settings, in terms of going through that journey. And the third bucket, we found a lot of again, especially relevant for youth. They approach kind of this engagement with labor markets in a more technical way sometimes, but it does help to, in a way, change the mental model aspect of how one thinks about work, and think a little bit about confidence, and tools like creating confidence, create your self-belief that you can actually achieve your goals, and actually this goal setting, kind of a setting specific goals. You can even if you want to be a CEO, you can backtrack and think a little bit more objectively of what are the goals. So even doing those exercises, we found that can help people to improve their probability of looking for work, probability of finding work and staying longer, etc. So I won't go to any specific examples, but we've done experiments across all of these journeys, and here's an example of the types of kind of bottlenecks that one can do, that we have found really interesting and positive results, that many times have been replicated in different countries. In education, we have honed in very concretely on this area about marginalized groups and education, and we've used theories of intelligence that basically suggest that people, will process how they learn in a not just in a technical way, but in a very, in a way that they see themselves and identify themselves in society in a way. So if you feel you're belong to some sort of marginalized group, you may be less likely to believe in yourself that you can learn. So how can you integrate that into a curriculum and help kids to kind of overcome that? So we've used theories like growth mindset theories or grids or more extensive, kind of modules, and we worked across many different countries and offering basically add-on modules for ministries of education teams at different, national or subnational levels. So here you see some examples from Peru. In the middle, you see cartoons in Indonesia we developed, and on the right, you see actually a TV cartoon that actually went national during COVID, during the pandemic, when schools were closed. But they all try to do the same thing. They help kids reflect on a general idea that everybody is equal, and it's all, a lot of the results we can get around learning is about changing our belief that we can all do it, and it's about perseverance. It's about it's not about if I can do it, but when I can do it, etc. And a lot of our evaluations have shown really exciting gains in equivalent up to a few months of catch up in either math and language, that in the settings where we could measure causally these effects, we found sustainable effects even a year later, and in some cases these effects were actually growing, suggesting that once things kick in, once the mental models change and beliefs kick in, some of these results are cumulative and they can actually increase over time. I think a couple more quick examples. We again, building a little bit on this student space, and we turned a little bit the table, and here's a very quick example to show how we wanted to tackle this issue of the relationship between student and teacher, knowing that a lot of that relationship is what drives performance, at least what the literature seems to suggest. And in this setting, we actually work with a virtual reality team to develop a script to provide an experience for teachers in Turkey, to give them a training around how does it feel to be in a classroom with mixed students, both Syrian refugees and Turkish students. And again, this idea comes from the theory around mental models, the theory of contact and perspective taking. So if you allow somebody see the same problem from different angles, hopefully that gives you different set of understanding, empathy, and the ability to then be more constructive around finding solutions to some of the potential frictions that happen. So that's that. And the last example I wanted to quickly show was a recent work over the last year, where we have done in 30-40 countries, working with ministries of health directly on the communication work on vaccination. We've done many things, but just giving you one example of a social media campaign that we do, where we experiment with different framings of messages that to see which one is more effective to increase the intake of vaccination. And you can see here that even a simple framing that suggests that, hey, experts and celebrities or experts and religious leaders are actually supporting, kind of, and believe that vaccination, is something, to be done and to promote health in the population, etc., can increase the intention of vaccine take-up, anything from 20 to 60%, and which are quite large numbers. And on top of it, what we've been finding is that when you're further able to target these results to specific concerns of people, these effects can actually be much larger. So again, this is an example of using social media, Facebook, and other social media platforms to do these quick experiments. So I want to finish with two slightly deeper kind of dives. So I want to speak about hiring, since we want to talk about, kind of or some administrative burden. So one example is from this. So I'm going to show you this picture, and a poll will pop up right now and ask you to vote for the left. If you were to hire somebody, would you vote from the left or the right? And just pick which one you want. Okay, I think we can, well, I think, okay, almost 40. So let's wait 5 more seconds. Okay, we can stop it now. So basically 77% would hire the person on the right. Okay, can you take the poll out, or do we need to do it? So I took mine out. All this to say, I'm gonna continue my slides, and if you can see, I have a check on the right. So the point is, in an experimental setting, asking people like you to randomly hire just because you saw these two pictures, and 70, majority of you will hire the same person, seems a little bit crazy, right? And yet it's true. And again, this is something, if I continue these exercises, we won't do the polling, but if I ask you to, again, hire the woman or the man, the majority of you in an experimental setting would vote, would hire to hire the woman. And if I showed you this example, it would be a little bit more 50-50, but most people, slight majority, would end up voting for the right. So what is happening here? Well, a few things, but mainly we are all biased in the way we see facial features, and sometimes even other characteristics like clothing and expressions. And but a lot of it is coming from things like the roundness of the face, and because those we have grown up in society to associate some of these attributes with trustworthiness and connectivity, etc. So so this very in a way unexpected or almost attributes that shouldn't matter, we know they matter. So now imagine you're at the World Bank or in your teams and you're hiring people, and you clearly, we know hiring can be a very biased process, for if anything for just the reason I just showed you, but there's so much more, because we all bring not only our heuristics, but we're going to bring even the cues of the social norms. Even in a panel interview, there's going to be social interactions, but also in a our own mental model. So I want to show you one of a few things we have been working with our HR team here very quickly. So the problem the HR team asked us was that in general there've been fewer women and or candidates from kind of a part 2 type countries at the bank, and the bank has been trying to raise that. And so, of course, when we started doing the journey, we came with something like this. So we tried to understand, well, what is the process? So, candidates apply, then there's, a long list, then the short list, then there is kind of the interview process, and then, you get somebody on board. And while many people, really focus on the interview process on these later stages, we realized that most of the problem was coming at the beginning. We found that, only 30% of the total applicant pool over the last 5 years when we did this work were actually women. So we realized, we're not getting a lot of, people, a lot of women to begin with. So we refined the problem to be, well, let's focus for this example on the rate of the application rate at just right up the front for technical jobs among qualified women and or candidates from countries with low representation. So what we did, we started realizing, we started exploring, the application process, and a lot of it actually ended up being how we understood the wording in job postings. And the summary is that there's a lot of literature that words, specific words, can actually be inviting or less inviting to different to different types, to different groups. And for example, and we found, with some text analytics that has sentiment analysis around, at least that the literature had been associating as more or less female, that we found that at the World Bank, there was only 11%. Kind of our language is so bureaucratic in some ways, but that bureaucratic kind of writing is definitely not in a way associated with probabilities of women applying for the jobs. And we also found that, World Bank jobs really feel much lower than many other organizations. So what we did, we worked through a LinkedIn partnership that we had, and we basically worked on the language of the invitations, and we sent, invitations that, were more personalized, spoke a little bit about the goals of the bank in terms of the staff and the diversity. We talked about we talked about the technical qualification of the jobs, and we talked about some of the benefits, and we talked about some things that literature finds that especially women or people from less kind of a more part two countries would make assumptions that sometimes jobs are already spoken for, and therefore if I don't fit, if there's a list of criteria, 5 criteria, if I don't fill all 5 of them, I'm not going to apply. So it's a mixture of kind of changing the language plus a lot of the interpretation of the information. Now in LinkedIn, the rates of people applying is quite low usually, so 7%, which was a control group, is not too bad. But 2 things to say about the experiment we did. We actually doubled the application rate, so that was a success. But we didn't see a difference between men and women or part 2, kind of 1-2 countries. But what was really exciting and encouraging to see that when we looked at those women, the pool among the women who applied because of the change in the posting, we actually found that in general, there was a 30% increase in the qualification of that group. So actually we were attracting much more qualified, technically qualified people. So again, a very quick example to show you the types of things you can do about hiring. There's way much more. And then the last example, and then I'll stop for questions, is about reducing kind of administered burden more directly. And in this, I want to show very quickly an example from Bangladesh, where again, to show how kind of behavior science can actually change the course of kind of our intervention. So we went in being asked, can you help to improve the offerings for a big cash transfer scheme that is offered to women and elder women? Can you offer kind of offerings for the social workers to do with the women, like for entrepreneurship, for other things? And as we were, so when we went in, we were focusing about beneficiaries. So we're talking to the beneficiaries of the problems, what do they want, how do they perceive the program, etc. But the more we talked to them, we realized that everybody, it was all about the social workers. They just had no time to focus on this, and a lot of the complaints was about the microcredit loan program, which is literally giving $1 or $2 loans to the beneficiaries. And the problem, the more we dug into, is that the social workers were spending a lot of time finding the beneficiaries, so they had to travel 2-3 times, within a month to find people, and they had, to at least do 3 or 4 replications of sort of the payment receipts. One's in the field, one's in the office, then another in the other office, and it was just so much burden on them to do this that they really had no time. And on top of it, they were really unhappy, clearly, because they were just doing administration. So we refined this problem. Well, forget about this increased interaction of social workers. Well, let's reduce the burden of social workers with respect to the microcredit loan implementation. So this became a completely different problem. And how did we do it? Well, we did a couple of things, but this is the main thing we did. On the left, it is basically we recreated all the bureaucracy into what you see, a very short form that just gave, name, village, amount, and the installment and the date. And for the beneficiaries, depending if they paid or didn't pay, we would put that stamp, red or green, or a star. So red meant they were delayed. So it was a queue. It was a visual queue. So we did those two things. And what happens? Well, we found that actually we reduced by 40% the time that the social workers needed to fill those receipts, about 2.5 hours in time savings per social worker per week. And we also found a 7% decrease in late repayment dates. So this cue, this nudging of reminding people or shaming them or feeling them, making them, realize they didn't pay, not only, repayment rate improved, but because they improved, it also meant people didn't now needed to go back. And you can see that in hours was about 9.5 hours of time saving per week. Like together, that's 12 hours a week. So it's 1.5 hours per week extra per social worker, which now we couldn't think to, what they could do with the beneficiaries to improve, mental health and other outcomes. And I think this is my last slide. And just to, hopefully this very kind of quick teaser gives you a sense of, what behavioral science, can do, where it comes from, the types of things one can do in terms of diagnostics. Again, diagnosis and understanding is, to me, what really kind of opens my eyes that, every context is different. And unless we find specific solutions for that context, things may not work as in the best design that we can. Evidence is the other thing, results, evidence, experimental evidence, causal evidence is really important, and it has helped us because it opens both our eyes, our colleagues' eyes, but also the counterparts and the governments that we have that, without evidence, it's hard to learn and build on it. Building through existing things. So behavior science is also about complementing. It's really about not replacing anything. It's just an extra tool. And of course, for scale, it's better to build from existing stuff. And while many of you, could be coming to behavior science through these kind of buzzwords of nudging, etc., it's really so much more than that. And it's really about psychology of poverty and many much more. And we've been happy to be able to be part of that. And the last thing I'll say, more and more that we do in my team, we are in a way moving to kind of this more government 2.0 idea that policymakers and a lot of our interventions, just like the social worker example I just gave, you really need to address their biases and their context and their behaviors, because in this kind of more top-down design from the get-go, from the decision maker, probably will have the largest impacts to kind of the types of outcomes we want. So I will stop here and happy to take any of your questions, and Mary will answer the hard ones. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much for that, Renos. It's a very comprehensive tour of various behavioral science projects, from tax to jobs to mindsets, and through to just all these lessons at the very end of your slide there about the importance of diagnostics and evidence base, and really kind of building on existing work. So really, really great. So now I will turn it over to a few questions that we have in the audience. So if you would like to ask the question yourself to our speaker, to myself, Lucy, I can unmute you to do that, or to do so, but no pressure to. So the first question we have is from Ananya. Could you, if you would like to talk, you can now speak. If not, I can ask your questions for you.
Thank you so much, Mary. Hi, Renos. Good evening. So my first question is basically when you're talking about the impact of religious leaders plus experts, or religious leaders and experts and celebrities. What I want to understand is, when the study was done on 30 to 40 countries, why is it that religious leaders had such a strong impact? Like, is it because the prominence of religion is far more in those countries, or any specific other reason?
Yeah, no, I apologize. I know I went fast to some results. So that was the results from just one country, in the Middle East area, and in that setting, it was actually, so if I can step back, we have used the religious leaders, not in every country, because usually when we've been doing these experiments, they have evolved over time, and because we do some, initial diagnostic to guide us as to, we obviously cannot test, 50 different things, so we have some limitations. So we pick the 3-4 things that are relevant. So usually when we talk to the ministries of health, etc., we can decide. So it turns out that that was a result from one of our initial tests in the Middle East, and I think the religious part was relevant, and they were interested to test, and that's why we tested it. So hopefully that clarifies that.
Great. Would you like to ask your second question as well, Ananya? Oh, yeah. You can speak if you'd like.
Thank you so much. So my second question is actually pretty much related to my master's dissertation. This one's basically regarding the hiring study that you had done at World Bank. So what I want to understand is that does the order in which, or the length of the hiring process, how does that bring about an impact in actually people applying or hiring? Because a lot of people drop out in the middle of the application process, considering the length or the order in which assessments or interviews are being conducted.
So you're asking if the length of the online application or the length of, in general, the process?
Both. So I mean, beginning with the online application, but also the entire process of hiring, considering it can take from any time between weeks to even months for somebody to get hired.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I mean, I guess so we didn't look at this, but I'm just trying to step back and think a little bit. I know the general process of, our organization does take, 2-3 months, usually the full process. And I mean, in my experience, I mean, I can't say that, people drop out, people do drop out somehow, but I'm not sure to what extent I can blame kind of our process and the length, as opposed to, people usually look for different jobs. And if they get other jobs, they kind of move on. But I mean, maybe it's the same thing. But yeah, no, I can't really answer to the first, because we didn't. It didn't come up as an issue. So and we haven't looked at it. But it's something to look. My sense, the online applications probably not, at least the initial application, not burdensome enough, I think, to discourage people from applying.
That helps. Thank you so much.
Okay, thanks for that, Renos and Ananya. So I might ask Lucy to come in here. She's the researcher on administrative burdens. Maybe she has some thoughts to say on length of the process and how that might impact applicants and their overall. So Lucy, over to you.
Yeah, so just to build a little bit on what Renos was saying, so I don't know the specific context of that trial, but just to speak a little bit about lengthy processes in general. So we know that long and tiresome administrative processes, in many cases, they do have an important negative impact on people's ability to get through that process. So sometimes we even refer to administrative burdens in the political debate as a time tax, because people have to pay the tax of having to take the time to do the process. And if it's complex, maybe it makes them feel frustrated, or they have, cognitive barriers that make it harder for them to get through the process. So we do have a solid body of evidence that tells us the simplest and shortest and least demanding way that we can, design a process, and the better. And we talk a bit about this in a briefing note on administrative burdens. So I might drop a link in the chat now in case you would like to read more.
That'll be very nice, Lucy. Thank you so much.
Great, thanks, Lucy, and thank you, Nanya. And Nanya, where are you from as well? I should have asked you this at the beginning. Where are you joining us from?
I am from India.
Great, thanks. Okay, so thank you for those two questions. Now we also have one from Mirka. I can give you the floor to speak if you'd like, or if you would like, I can also ask your question for you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Mary, and thank you, Renos, for this very interesting presentation. Mirka Dreger, I'm working on ethics at UNESCO, and I'm very much interested in all this behavioral science issue, which is very relevant for ethics as well, ethical behavior. And I was just wondering, the example you gave on Bangladesh on this payment scheme, and where you said like the red or green, but also the red stamp could be motivating for people to actually pay. And I thought the whole idea behind behavioral sciences is more about not that much sanction, rather than encouraging good behavior through the example as the social norm. For example, others have already paid. So I was a bit surprised to see the red stamp as next. I just wanted to hear from you. Thanks, but it's very interesting overall. Thanks so much.
Yeah, I think to be honest, our original idea was to serve as a visual. Our discussions was, how can we think of a visual reminder of, so a star, red, green. I mean, I think that's a little bit our original thinking. But it also reminds me, we have done another study about encouraging people reduce water bills, water consumption in South Africa a while back. And one of the things we tested was to introduce, to create a default setting where people, consumers who would spend, a maximum amount of water or less, a threshold or less. So they were good, water citizens in this context. By default, they would the water board would publish their name online as a recognition, and we thought, okay, that's kind of positive reinforcement. And what we found, it actually had a big effect, like a 15% reduction in water use by kind of the group. But in the qualitative work, we found mixed insights, and speaks a little bit to what you say. On one end, yes, many people, really embrace this kind of a social recognition. But a few people did say that they did this kind of by fear of being kind of shamed, right? Because if your name was not there, you could indirectly deduce that somebody didn't spend, somebody spent, more water. And it's a really good question of how to balance these two things. And like my personal, kind of a approach to this is, we need to be careful, and we need to think, kind of any, kind of adverse or some of these punishment versus encouragement things. But I think this is where the value of testing lies, and the evidence, and I think, helping us, revisit, how we should scale or not scale or replicate some of this work. So that's a good point. I agree.
Great, thank you for that question. I see there's another one in the chat, so I think I'll interpret it as I can. I'm not sure if I get it entirely, but I think it's a question about how do we make sure that people don't feel they're being watched in our studies or our experiments? How do we ensure that they are participants in a fully consenting way? Could you speak a little bit to that, maybe, Renos, how you ensure that?
Yeah, I mean, it's I've come through kind of the academic side of things, so I can see, I can really empathize with that. All I can say is, I feel, in most, if not all of our work, we've tried to be very transparent. Like, for example, the work we've done with COVID, all of our surveys online, there's a first, kind of a, 10% of what we present to people to answer is about opting in, and it's about, who we are, and a link to the World Bank, and a link to, what this is, try to condense in as much so we don't make a bureaucracy like the hiring, like 60 pages. It's tough. It's not always easy, but there's no excuse not to do it. I feel it's easy to do, and it's easy to be transparent. And, whether that from a research hat, sometimes that may or may not bias in a way the experiment itself. If somebody sees the World Bank or sees a government logo or whatever, we know these things do matter because they do matter. But I agree, we need to be respectful, and we need to feel, we're not kind of like I would, we citizens, we are citizens, and everybody is a citizen, so we're all in the same boat, and we need to, really be respectful and empathetic, and really not treat people as anything other than that. So the more transparent we can be from the get-go as to who we are and why we're doing this, I think the better. It's not always easy, though. I agree. For kind of practicality reasons, not for lack of intention.
Yeah, definitely. It's a very good point. And I think it's something that's echoed across the UN and all of the conversations we've had, no matter which entity you're from, it's something that comes up. And as Renos has mentioned, each project is different. Each diagnostic is different, each context is different. How you approach all of these issues can vary depending on the project and the setting you're working in. So yeah, but I will also flag as well, in that guide that we shared that maybe put in the chat again, there is a page on ethics in there. It's very brief, it's very high level, but it gives you kind of a bit more detail in terms of what Renos was talking about and how the considerations we take in doing experiments and studies in this space, because it can be quite challenging. So if there aren't any more questions, we might just close it up for today. Although I do see Alison Delkowitz has joined us, and she's from the Save the Children's Behavioral Science team. So I don't know if she has any comments or thoughts on today's session she might want to share with us. If you do, Alison, I can allow you to talk.
Hi, thanks, Mary and Renos. Nice to see you guys here. I was just looking for like a practical tool for a sludge audit. Like, this is how you do a workshop, or this is how like do the behavior map first and then do this. I'm just quite curious. I remember reading the whole friction book and couldn't find a tool. I'm getting through Cass Sunstein's book now, but.
Yeah, great question, Alison. Lucy, would you like to come in and maybe speak to some of the work in the guide?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is a super timely question, Alison, because looking at sludge and administrative burdens, as you know, is a very recent area of focus, both for researchers and practitioners. So we're really in the beginning stages of this. In the practitioner's guide, we try to offer some preliminary steps that you can take, and like an approach that we think could be a good way to identify burdens and to tackle them. So it involves, looking at the behavior that you're interested in and kind of digging into the context, talking to stakeholders, and doing a number of exercises to assess what the burden is, what dimensions it takes, and if and how you should tackle it. And then we also offer some advice on the type of interventions that might work, but again, super context dependent, and how to determine these sort of interventions. Now, there are maybe more detailed and prescriptive examples that are starting to emerge. I know that the Australian New South Wales government is doing really amazing work on this. So they have a whole team called the Sludge Reduction Team, and they are going to publish sludge audit materials very soon. So that's some resources that we think will be really key in helping doing audits of administrative burdens. But for now, we hope that the resources linked in the guide, the content of the guide itself, and so on will provide a good resource for you.
Thanks a lot, Lucy.
I also see Eva's joined us from the New South Wales team in Australia. I know it's quite late, but if you'd like to come in, Eva, feel free to speak. If not, that's completely fine as well. Okay.
PJ's accepted.
Yeah, exactly. We're all friends here. That's fine as well. We can share those resources from the New South Wales team when they come out. We'll put that on our list to share with all of you. So with that, I think we've reached our time here. Thank you very much for joining us. And this really interesting panel, just examples provided by Renos and the questions from the audience. Any more specific questions for us, the Behavioral Science Group, feel free to get in contact with myself or Johanna or Lucy. And yeah, thank you very much. Hope to see you at other events during the week. Thanks, everyone.
Bye, everyone. Thank you. And feel free to reach out also to me or my team for any follow-up questions.